As we've said before, the Republican health care plan is having an identity crisis because the Republican Party is also having its own identity crisis. You can call it Trumpism versus Ryanism, conservatism versus nationalism, or a populist versus Tea Partiers. Which direction will the party go? Whose party will this end up being? Breitbarts senior editor-at-large Joel Pollack co-wrote a book about Trump's historic presidential campaign called How Trump Won, the inside story of a revolution. He says, quote, "Although I believe Trump could win, I did not think he would." And now Pollack has actually released part of the book's original conclusion, written in the event of a Trump loss. And Pollack writes in part, "The populist and nationalist movement behind Trump will not simply disappear after his defeat and will present a continued political puzzle to more libertarian-minded conservatives. Of course, a Trump victory would have made resolving these divisions and contradictions much easier. But guess what? The spoils of winning offer new opportunities to mend fences." But is that wishful thinking for Republicans at this point? Well, the author, or the co-author, Joel Pollack, joins me now. Joel, welcome to Beef Press Daily.
Good to be here.
Here is the book. We'll give it a hand plug there. So let me ask you this, since we're in the middle of the health care bill. Do you accept nationalism versus Trump conservatism, that this is what this debate is about inside the Republican Party?
I think it's there to some extent. I think that the conservative option was easier to take when it wasn't about governing, that it was easier to formulate in opposition, which is why the Republicans came up with so many repeal plans. And I think the new task of governing, particularly with the majority that Trump brought, or at least the coalition he brought, because he didn't win the popular vote majority, includes a lot of people who were from blue states. He reached right into the heart of that Democratic coalition and brought them onto the Republican big tent. So Trump's got to look after those voters as well, and many of those voters are from working class backgrounds, people who may get their health insurance from an employer or maybe even are on the expanded Medicaid program. So the new health policy has to be a conservative policy in order to get conservatives on board, but it also has to take care of a far wider constituency than perhaps conservatives were thinking about when they were in the opposition.
Are we throwing the word conservative around too much in that right now there's actually a battle to define what it is?
There's always a battle to define what it is.
Right.
I mean, some people would say it's almost become a meaningless term, but it basically...
I feel that way sometimes, meaning because it's just like an umbrella word to people.
I think the consensus is, with regard to Obamacare, is small government. We want a healthcare system that's not run by the government. And there are different versions of what that would look like. The point that Paul Ryan keeps emphasizing is we want individuals to be able to choose from their health plans, choose their doctors and that sort of thing. So choice defines small government conservatism in that sense. And there's another sense in which we don't want government doing anything this big at all, that if you're going to cover people, let the free market do it. And the emphasis is on reforming the system simply by letting Obamacare fade and fail and letting pieces get picked up by private industry and sorting it out that way.
So what it sounds like your argument is, look, that's the difference between sort of small government conservatism and Trump nationalism, which is not all small government is bad, or not all government is bad in this case. Maybe government should help in some sectors.
Right, and it's not a conservative argument, but it definitely was very important to Trump in winning the campaign. I mean, the initial surge that Trump had in the primary came when he championed the cause of families who had been harmed by crimes committed by illegal aliens. And the reason that resonated with a much wider constituency was because he was talking about people who were supposed to have been protected by the government and weren't. Now, conservatives, including libertarians, would agree that the first priority of government is to protect people, national defense, safety, and security. But Trump's message resonated because of a broader set of issues. People were promised they could keep their insurance, and they couldn't. People were promised that terrorists would be kept out of the country, and they weren't. This idea of security embraces not just physical security and national security, but economic security and all kinds of other things. And that was a kind of security coalition that Trump championed. And so he promised people he was going to take care of them, not in the nanny state paternalistic sort of way on every issue, but certainly with regard to health insurance, which for many people is a life and death issue.
What's President Trump have at risk with this current bill?
Well, I think there's a little bit of a method to the apparent chaos in the process of this bill's debate. I think, and this is a theory I've put out there, that Trump has allowed Congress just enough rope to hang itself, basically saying to the policy experts who had 6 years to work on it, all right, I'll stand behind you.
You've been railing this, go for it.
Right, go for it. And he supports them, so forth, but knows that there are strong constituencies that are going to oppose this bill, not just because of the things that are in it, but because you can't really craft a policy this big that way. It has to be a political process of bringing stakeholders on board, doctors, patients, that kind of thing. So he kind of, I think, anticipates that this is going to run into problems, and that then the stakeholders will come back to him for his own version of the solution.
So does that mean he wants to see this version fail, or it's not that, or he expects it to fail?
I don't even know that the final solution will look that different once the ultimate health care reforms are passed, the repeal in place, whatever it looks like. I think, though, that he wants to craft a different kind of process. And I think he understands also how these deals get made. I mean, if you read The Art of the Deal, it's one meeting after another, one constituency after another. These things have to be stitched together. He knows that this ultimately isn't going to come down to the politicians and meeting with one caucus or one group of Republicans and Democrats or another. The way this is going to get done is by bringing the interest groups on board, by bringing the broader groups, the patients, the hospitals, the insurers, all the people involved in the healthcare system, to understand that this may not be an ideal solution, whatever he comes up with in the end, but it's better than the alternative. And what he's showing everybody is that the alternative is unacceptable, whether Obamacare fails or we have a policy that leaves people out in the cold.
There's a lot of folks that like to read Breitbart and try to interpret to say it was a message being sent over here, a message being sent over there. Literally, I think now people do Control F Ryan to see what you or others are writing about Paul Ryan and what to read into various things on Paul Ryan. Are people overreading it, or is there some concern inside that White House about Ryan's handling of this bill?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but with regard to Paul Ryan, I mean, we have a lot of different perspectives inside Breitbart. This is no secret. I mean, I'm historically and in the past have been very much in favor of a lot of the policies that Ryan has done. I wrote an article right after the election that all Trump really needs to do to govern well is just take a lot of Ryan's bills that he was trying to get through Congress and just sign them, and that's it. I think a lot of Paul Ryan's ideas have been very good. I think the problem that a lot of libertarian-minded conservatives have with this particular bill is that this wasn't the one that passed previous Congresses. This doesn't look like the conservative version of health care reform that they were expecting. It's almost as if House Republican leaders, anticipating the need to compromise with Democrats later on, compromised in this version of the bill. So I think that's where it has been a bit of a problem for conservatives, who are now saying that if we just let Obamacare fail on its own, we would actually cover more people than by passing this bill. And so, look, I'm very much a fan of Ryan and the approach he takes intellectually to these things. I think that politically, Trump wants to see something more. And that does play out in the pages of Breitbart sometimes. We have voices that are more skeptical of the House Republican leadership and voices that are more supportive.
While I have you here, I got to ask, since you were the author of the article that supposedly triggered the president's tweet that said, Obama had me wiretapped. Did you overwrite that?
Did I?
Did you overwrite?
Overwrite.
Overwrite this issue of this idea, and do you think you did you unintentionally mislead the president? That about what Obama did?
Oh, I see what you're asking.
Yes.
No, the story about how this article was written is very simple. It was late at night, and I was washing dishes, listening to Mark Levin's show from earlier in the day, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. I had seen all these articles, but nobody had actually put the case together the way Levin had, and so I reported the way he put it together, and I added some of the historical events that happened in between to basically show that the government under the Obama administration had done some surveillance of individuals close to Trump or a computer server in Trump Tower, and that somehow the result
none of that had been confirmed, though. You hadn't confirmed any of this stuff. There had been speculation.
Right. But
none of it, because we'd been trying to confirm some of this, and we never had.
It was the New York Times, the Washington Post, the BBC, the Guardian.
No, there was allusions to it, but nobody had confirmed this.
The Times had former and current government officials talking about some of the conversations that had been listened into. So, you know, if what you're saying is true, that it was speculative, it was certainly being treated as established reality, because all of these speculative pieces were being used to build a case about Russian hacking and Russian influence. And all of a sudden, when, you know, like a Jenga tower, you sort of tugged at the bottom of it, that case fell apart, and now it becomes a question about, well, how did the government get this information, and how did the press find out about it? And suddenly people were not interested in talking about Russian hacking anymore. So it's interesting to see how these stories get built, but what I found interesting in what Levin had put together was that there was all this reporting from mainstream sources that seemed to indicate that there was some kind of monitoring or surveillance, legal or illegal or whatever, we didn't know. But the most disturbing part about it was that the rules of the NSA had been relaxed so that the intelligence they gathered could be shared more widely among government agencies, and that it seemed to be something more than a coincidence that after
should your
that, all this
article
was
have
leaking to
been
the press.
interpreted by the president as fact-based, or that you were basically laying out a potential scenario?
I don't know if the president was reading my article in particular, but that was a scenario laid out by Mark Levin.
So you were reporting a scenario,
yes.
not necessarily saying this was fact, this was cold, hard fact.
No, it's a set of facts lined up to make an argument about what happened, which is how many legal arguments are crafted.
No.
You have all these different things that happen, and the sources, in this sense, were unimpeachable because they were from the mainstream media. This wasn't, conspiracy website here or there. This was stuff that was being reported, and just nobody had really pulled it together. And the question really is about how did this intelligence, how was it collected, and how did it come into the hands of the media, and why was it being used in the way it was? And I think it looks like we're going to start to get some answers about that.
We are not going to let the fake news tell us what to do, how to live, or what to believe.